Hi, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 2 of My Words, Our Journey, the podcast. I'm Monty, your host, and today we'll start with Chapter 4 of What If. Chapter 4. Could time go any slower? Mitch looked at the clock for the third time in 5 minutes. Mitch Lipton was waiting for his workday to come to a close. Every Thursday, he and his neighbor and coworker, Aaron Walker, enjoyed some time at Sparks, the neighborhood sports bar. A smile crossed his face as he thought about the fact they had not missed a Thursday in over 3 years, if you didn't count their 2 vacations each year, which the pair spent together along with their wives. The two men had not started out as friends when they first arrived at the newly created middle-class community. It must have been 2 or 3 months before they even spoke. Even then it was forced. Their wives had met, bonded, and pulled them into a four-way friendship, which was destined to include dinners, parties, and the occasional cookout. Today, if asked, they could both admit it was a rough beginning. No one likes to be told who they should or shouldn't be friends with. Some just fight it more than others. Fortunately, women are smarter than men. Mitch and Aaron eventually gave in to the inevitable. What started with pretending to be sick to skip dinner dates, faking car trouble to miss movie nights, and finding other couples to go out with ultimately turned into a strong bond between four neighbors. It was ideal. Bridget and Julie loved to spend time together, whether it was on the phone sharing gossip, going to the gym, walking around the neighborhood, or their favorite, shopping. They enjoyed each other's company and did not mind the boys doing boy things, as they like to put it. This was good because the boys did like to do boys things. Over the past several years, they had found many common interests. One year, they restored a 1972 Chevy Nova from the ground up. 2 years later, they did the same thing to a 1970 Monte Carlo. Aaron still had the Nova, and Mitch the Monte. They came out only a few times a year. They also read many of the same authors, listened to the same talk show personalities, and of course, together, they had started Thursday Night Boys Night Out. This was the one night of the week the friends knew exactly what they'd be doing after work. The ladies were smart. They knew by agreeing to this, they controlled every other night of the week. Aaron and Mitch knew this too, but it was okay. Many men, they knew, would kill just to have one night a month, let alone one night a week. Mitch looked up from his desk when he felt someone watching him. There, standing in the doorway, was his best friend and neighbor. "It's 2 minutes after 5. You trying to gain some brownie points or what?" Aaron asked, with more than a hint of sarcasm. "What, you don't like having the bathroom to yourself from 4:30 to 5 so you can get pretty for me?" Mitch responded without much effort. Their sense of humor had rubbed people the wrong way more than once in the office. At work, they tried to tame it just a bit. If it wasn't at each other's expense, they tried to refrain. Their destination was less than 3 blocks from the accounting firm that each liked to call The Rock. Some days it seemed like a lifetime, but in reality, it had only been 2 months short of 4 years that they had worked at the firm. It was really the only job either friend had had since college. Aaron told their bar buddies he was responsible for Mitch having his job. In truth, it was Aaron's Uncle Charlie who had helped both men get their foot in the door. Without his help, they would have just been two names out of about 200 that were waiting on a waiting list to even get an interview. They had discussed their prior jobs over a few beers one night. It was a toss-up which one had experienced the worst job. They had both laughed so hard at each other's stories, they had tears running down their faces. Conversation was rare on the walk. There would be plenty of time for that over the next several hours. The walk was time to put the workday behind them, so you could get to more important things in life. The subject of work never came up. The conversation always centered around sports, the glory days, anything that went fast, and sometimes even the wives, but never the job. There were very few things in life that either friend looked forward to more than opening the door to Sparks. For the rest of the day, their cares, worries, and stresses would be left at the door, and that was a good feeling. With Aaron opening the door, Mitch was hit with the sound of Clay Walker on the jukebox. The crowd at this particular bar loved country music. Rarely did you ever hear anything else playing from the jukebox or from a live band within these walls. While the lighting was dim, familiar faces could be seen moving throughout the bar. The crowd had begun to arrive early this particular evening because the bar was holding a pool tournament. It had been promoting it for over a month. Mitch spotted a table in the back corner, out of the way, and pointed in that direction as he began to move. With a smile, Aaron pointed in the direction of the bar and was gone. Mitch was never one to search out a crowd or want to be in the center of attention. Nah, he'd rather be on the outside looking in. He liked to think of himself as a people person who did not always need to be around people. This had been an adjustment for Aaron. He'd prefer to be right in the middle of it all. Mitch waited as his friend made his way to the back corner. Small talk and half hugs from both genders slowed him down. Aaron was easy to like and hard to find fault with, especially in his atmosphere. "I ordered nachos to get us started," Aaron said as he placed 2 drafts on the table and began to look for an ashtray. "Gone again." Mitch could not help but think about how Bridget hated the way his clothes smelled when he got home. He was a slow learner, admittedly. Now, however, he placed his clothes and whatever jacket he may be wearing straight into the washer before he stepped foot in the house. He even used the small half bath in the garage to brush his teeth, wash up, add a little smell good, and try his best to rid himself of all the bar odors. It was never mentioned. However, he knew his bride appreciated the effort, even if he wasn't completely successful. Returning triumphant, ashtray held high, Aaron started positioning his chair so he'd have the best view possible from their table. Paula, a pretty young blonde, came by with a sign-up sheet for the tournament. Both declined with a smile. By the time the guys were seeing the bottom of their glasses, the nachos were arriving at the table, and Aaron was ordering another round. Mitch noticed an older gentleman at the bar reaching up to make an adjustment to the television. This was odd, only due to the fact that the owners had posted signs everywhere warning of the penalty of such behavior. Mitch could not hear what the 40-something male news anchor with perfect hair and a set of white teeth that would make a supermodel envious was saying. However, he could see the photograph of the woman in the top right corner of the screen. "Did we come here to get depressed by the news or do some male bonding?" Aaron asked as he leaned across the small table to make sure he had Mitch's attention. Mitch turned from the news and smiled. "Whatever the story is, I'm sure there's no happy ending," Mitch replied as he lit his first cigarette in a week. Both friends were what many would call closet smokers. They, on the other hand, preferred the term casual smoker. The only other time either would smoke was when they were extremely stressed. Fortunately for both, life was good and stress was at a minimum. For the next hour, the conversation centered on the latest NASCAR race, the highlights, lowlights, and how each of their favorite drivers had finished. The table of 2 had gradually become a table of 7, without Mitch or Aaron really noticing. Mitch would have been hard-pressed to name each person that had gathered at the table. Aaron was always trying to fill him in on the latest gossip surrounding their bar buddies. Most of the time, Mitch had no interest and rarely knew who his friend was talking about anyway. In a small town, he had to work hard not to know everyone and their business. Mitch worked hard at avoiding the endless gossip. He always felt he had enough trouble keeping up with his own life. There really wasn't time for or effort left for anyone else. A few more people joined the conversation when the Chevy Ford argument had nearly reached its conclusion for the evening. Someone changed the subject to the latest news out of Marion, Virginia. Marion was only about an hour northeast. A woman had been kidnapped. From what Mitch could gather from the table, a woman somewhere between the age of 20 and 60 was either taken from her yard or carjacked while sitting in a traffic light. She was found or was still missing, and the police had spoken to her husband and their 2 boys, and they were either cleared or still prime suspects. Nobody really knew what was going on with the case. It always amazed him how so many people could hear so many different versions of the same story. Mitch guessed this was the same woman he had seen on the screen earlier. He thought of Bridget and left to call home and say goodnight. She never gave him a hard time about calling. Maybe that's why he did it. He was a lucky man, and he knew it. He did not reach her on the home phone, so he tried her cell. In her line of work, the cell was never out of arm's reach. She answered on the second ring. Hearing her voice still made him smile. From the beginning of their courtship until now, she had that effect on him. Maybe that wouldn't be a good topic to bring up when he returned to the table. He could hear the names now, and none of them would be flattering. Feeling good about his marriage, Mitch was alone with his thoughts when he returned to the table and overheard, "She probably ran off with the neighbor." Mitch followed the words across the table to Tom, the local barfly who had twice been divorced. If memory served, Tom had caught his first wife with a local teenager, and his second had moved in with a man she had met at one of Tom's company parties. Bitter probably wasn't the right word. However, it was close. Aaron quickly turned the conversation back to sports, this time the local baseball team and their amazing winning streak. As the pool tournament ended and the spectators began to empty out the bar, so did many of Mitch and Aaron's drinking buddies. It always ended the same. There weren't too many Thursdays they did not hear the turning of the lock as the boys' night ended. When Aaron had gone to fight the lines for last call, Mitch began to think about the poor family in the news story. How must it feel not to know, to wonder about all the possibilities? His thoughts returned to Bridget. Mitch took many things in life for granted. His lovely wife was not one of them. Men joked about marrying up. Mitch did. When the two first met through a mutual college friend, Mitch felt there was something special about her. She's just simply the most interesting, sexy, challenging, fun-loving, understanding woman he had ever known, and on top of all that, she was his best friend. "Yo, man, you seem out there. Take this, it'll draw you back in." Mitch looked up to see Aaron holding them both a draft and some kind of a shooter. If not for the taxi that would be waiting for them outside, one of the two men would have to watch the other enjoy his beverages. They had tried it early on, with little success. Aaron had gone out and found a very nice old man who appeared to own his own taxicab that was nearly as old as Mitch. Nevertheless, Stanley was more than happy to drive the two 12.5 miles home each Thursday for $30. He was never late. The cab was old, but always clean. If they needed to stop for any reason, he did not complain, and he was always smiling. The two men knew very little about Stanley. Unfortunately, the only time they spent any time with him was when they had been drinking and talking for hours and just wanted to get home. More than once, they had commented about taking him to lunch one day and getting to know the man that kept them alive and out of jail each week. Over the years, they had heard several stories about others leaving the bar intoxicated and the results. It made for a more relaxing evening knowing they were covered at the end of the night. It was all well worth the $30 each week, and more importantly, the wives wouldn't have had it any other way. Chapter 5. Friday mornings were always the same. A slight headache and the knowledge it was going to be a long day. Mitch stood in front of the mirror and looked at his short sideburns to make sure they were as even as possible this morning. He realized over the past few years he had tried several different remedies to the morning after headache, with little to no success. He had many friends who swore by whatever means they had used to avoid or lessen the effects of alcohol. He had tried those too. This morning, he had a concoction containing OJ, granola cereal, yogurt, and one goody powder, all tossed into a blender. The house was always quiet in the mornings. He never heard Bridget leave before 6:30 each day. Unlike himself, she could be as quiet as a mouse. There was a note on the counter reminding him it was his turn to pick up dinner. At the end of each week, they would take turns bringing home takeout. It was getting harder and harder to be creative. On the television, there was a commercial for one of the latest kids' learning toys. More and more lately, Mitch had been thinking about children. Bridget had not brought up the subject in a while, but he knew it weighed heavy on her heart. If it had been up to her, they would have had a house full of kids by now. The two had begun as friends. At the beginning, Mitch was dating someone semi-seriously, and through Fred's, he had learned Bridget was totally focused on her studies and future career in real estate. After several months, neither could deny the attraction, nor hide the way they felt about each other when they were in the same room. Once they gave in to love, there was no stopping them. You could not separate the two. After spending only 5 minutes with the couple, anyone could tell they were deeply in love. To some, it was over the top, and to others, it was inspiring. It had been a short courtship, a simple but perfect wedding, and to date, Mitch could not ask for anything more in his marriage. He was told by many the next logical step was children. It was a subject that, for a while, had come up often. Not lately, though, Mitch realized. Maybe it was time to... The phone ringing interrupted his thoughts. Answering on the third ring, Mitch said hello and waited to see who caused that awful noise in his head to go from loud to unbearable. But there was nothing but a hint of background noise. Great, Mitch thought. Here comes the sales pitch. Hello, can I help you? Mitch said, a little more forceful than he intended. Still, no one would speak on the other end. So Mitch hung up the phone, went back to more important things, like fixing his breakfast. Over the next week, Mitch could not turn on a radio or television without hearing something about the poor woman missing in Marion within minutes. He had caught himself changing the station to avoid the story. It was not looking encouraging. The news reports had not changed. Mary Wilson had been abducted from her front yard in an otherwise peaceful neighborhood. The police had ruled out her husband and to date had no suspects and very few leads. According to what he had heard and read, there had been no ransom or contact from the assailants. Mr. Wilson and the children had been pleading on each of the local channels, and Mitch thought he could see the hope fading in their eyes each time he saw them on the screen. Did anyone truly believe there was a chance that this family could have a happy ending? Things like that only happened in the movies. Mitch was one of those who did not feel a movie always had to have a happy ending, or a positive ending, for that matter, for it to be a good movie. Bridget, on the other hand, considered it a waste of time if she watched a movie that didn't leave her feeling sentimental when it was over. On the subject, they both could agree. With all the terrible things going on in the world, it was nice to watch something with a happy ending sometimes. While his thoughts had wandered from Mary Wilson to movies, Mitch pulled into the local store where he knew his wife had, at some point, given him a movie rental card. Tonight would be a good night for a romantic comedy. The aroma from the Chinese food Mitch had picked up from the new restaurant in Abington had filled up the car when he returned with the movie in tow. From the smell, dinner was going to be pretty good. Mitch was in a particularly good mood this evening. Other than the fact it was the start of the weekend, Mitch had decided to bring up the idea of starting a family. He wanted to have the conversation and see where it led. Can I just talk to her for a few minutes? I'd like to reassure her there's no reason for her to be scared, that we're not going to hurt her. She doesn't have to worry herself sick. Derek asked his brother through a mouthful of Lucky Charms. We covered all this before. We all agreed no more contact than necessary. You'd get comfortable, you'd give something away, let something slip, then you know what would have to happen, right? Let's stick to the plan. Stay away from her. Drake knew this would be a problem for Derek. Between the two, Derek had always been more of a people person. To this day, Drake could not understand how his brother did many of the things he did or had done. For someone who truly seemed to like people in general, he could turn on a dime. It was almost scary. There had been an incident only a few months back that illustrated exactly that. The pair had been running some errands around town, not necessarily looking for trouble, just out. Off the side of the road, Derek noticed a couple trying to change a tire on their car. It did not look like they were having much luck. He had insisted they stop and help. Drake had no interest and actually stayed in the car for most of the time. In only a matter of minutes, Derek had learned the couple lived in Bristol for several years, and they were on their way home from a birthday party. He had joined in the process of changing the tire and had politely moved the woman out of the way so he could work. He had told her a man of his size needed his space and laughed. Drake could see through the windshield. Everyone appeared to smile and laugh during this time. He had thought about seeing if he could be any help. That really just wasn't his style. So he had a front row seat for the show that was about to play out in front of him. Derek had listened to this man he was trying to help talk down to his wife repeatedly. Keeping quiet, not intruding in another man's business, was not in his DNA. That is why, after hearing a nice lady degraded for the upteenth time, he just couldn't take it anymore. With one swift move of his right hand, the tire iron caught the unexpected victim right between the legs. He never had a chance, and the sound that came from him could have been heard by Derek inside the truck with the windows up. It sounded sort of like a cross between a wounded animal and a broken bullhorn. A normal man would have stopped with one blow and moved on. Unfortunately, Derek was not a normal man by any stretch of the imagination. Drake counted a minimum of 4 more hits before Derek handed the weapon to the sobbing and visibly shaken wife, smiled, and told her she should not take any more disrespect. He walked back to the truck, and they drove away. He had learned much about the couple, but they didn't learn nothing about Derek until it was too late. Two things his brother always told folks: never think you figured me out, and never ever turn your back. I just thought I could make her feel better after the whole thing, Let her know we're not all bad. Somebody's looking out for her. Derek brought his brother back to reality. We can't take a chance. Nothing can go wrong, bro. Nothing can go wrong. The plan would work just fine with or without Mary. Each member knew that Mary's usefulness was complete as soon as she was reported abducted. And with that, we'll conclude this episode. Thank you for joining me on the journey. Have a great day.